Okay. Hi, Mark. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you doing, Douglas?
Doing fine. Thank you for coming on the show. I appreciate it.
My pleasure.
I've been looking forward to talking to you because marriage and relationships is always an interesting topic. I think no matter who talks about it. And we've all probably had similar situations and circumstances. Your company is called High Thrive Coaching, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And I mean, are you marriage counselors? Is that kind of what you do?
Yeah, more or less. We've created a bit of a specific niche, though I uh, do general marriage counseling. Like a lot of our typical clients are really in some dire circumstances, and a lot of the times we might have just one person within the couple looking for advice on how to put their relationship back together.
Okay. Is it usually one person's fault that a relationship isn't working, or is it both?
No, 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 no. No, it's usually both have contributed in some ways. There's almost always some sort of pattern that's going on between the two of them. It might be something like uh, one person starts to retreat when there's anything emotional going on, and so the other partner learns to not bring up their emotions, or and it turns into a situation where neither one can give or receive feedback. This is just one example, but it tends to be interactions like this that lead to big marriage trouble when they're left unchecked.
Because I know that people, once they start getting into arguments, and this doesn't have to be necessarily with your spouse, it could be with your boss or with a coworker, with anybody, people tend to get defensive and the walls start to go up, and that usually is not a good situation to resolve an issue, is it?
No, no, no. In fact, like someone that I reference quite often, within the relationship realm, one of the big names is Dr. John Gottman. He actually talks about that specifically. He talks about certain things that are really good predictors of divorce. One of them being defensiveness, and specifically, defensiveness. It's a situation where someone is not really able to receive that feedback, and so nothing gets done. If you're talking about our relationship, of course, I hardly know you, but if I was never able to come to you and say anything without you getting defensive, it would quickly shut down those kind of conversations, and we wouldn't be able to resolve much of anything.
What I always thought that dedication was probably the most important part for me personally. I got married very late. I got married at 43 for the first time. And I know it took a big adjustment because I was used to living alone for so long. And we would have these piddly little fights like moving the toaster in the kitchen. And it isn't where I was used to having it. And stuff like that. I can laugh about that now, but it was really serious at the time that it happened. Um, what do you see when you have your clients come in? What do you see is there a common one that like everybody comes in with, or are they
Well,
all unique?
so you give an example. In terms of like a broad category of what tends to go wrong is a little bit what I was referring to earlier. But I tend to say that, one of two things is typically happening. The couple's unable to uh, discuss what is wanted and have that, supported, or they're unable to discuss problems and have those resolved. You right here, even though this was a small issue of where the toaster was, it was a big problem with being able to discuss the problem and have it resolved. This is a very broad category and it applies roughly to everything, but a lot of the little problems fall under one of these things. It's a communication problem and a problem with being able to hear that something could be wrong in the relationship, or that something needs to be addressed and needs to change.
Another example that I want to bring up is when I was in college, we had roommates, and if you bought food, after a while, I had to hide my food because the other roommates would just go through and eat everything. Okay. And there was always this sort of joke about, oh, who ate the cookies?
Hmm.
When you get into a marriage, I realized that you can't do that. That never works. It's not my stuff and your stuff. It's our stuff.
Of course.
Okay. But I don't know that everybody understands that idea. And I've seen
Yeah.
people get into arguments about, you know.
Hmm. Yeah, I typically see that as a bit of a red flag. If there is a really strong division of what is yours and what is mine. I like, for instance, early on in my marriage, I've been married for about 15 years now. My wife and I, we made a decision and said, okay, everything that we own, it's together. So even though my wife is for the most part a homemaker, we have 5 kids and it's a full-time
Oh,
job
God, yeah.
running the household. Whatever I make, I consider that's her money. She earned it. And similarly, I see other situations like examples like you gave, where couples will say, okay, we need to have separate bank accounts and we're going to take care of separate bills. And part of the problem with that is it creates arguments. And the big factor here is, are things fair? Am I getting what I deserve out of this? And it raises those sort of concerns up more frequently when there is a lot of concern over who owns what or whose responsibility is what. And it's much more healthy if you talk about, say, possessions or responsibilities in kind of a relationship context. Like this, we need to fix the car and we need to take care of these bills and we need to take care of the kids. How are we going to handle this together?
Well, right, exactly. And the counting the cookies just doesn't make it. I mean, it absolutely doesn't make it
Mm.
in a marriage.
Well, it's the same sort of thing. Like you're kind of referencing the situation where, like, one, someone owns the cookies, or two, someone is blamed for eating the cookies. And obviously the example of cookies is inconsequential. Who's going to care about some cookies? Just buy some more cookies. But it's this kind of idea that some things are mine, and you're not allowed to touch it. Now, of course, there's room for healthy boundaries, for me to have some autonomy, for me to have some choices. But yeah, as a general rule, that I think there's not a lot of room for that in a really healthy, long-term, dedicated relationship.
The relationships that I've seen, and including my own, that have been successful, or at least appear to be successful, have been ones where one partner had their thing, the other partner had their thing, and then they had their together thing. So
Hmm.
they weren't together 24 hours a day.
Oh, of course not.
That I don't think that can work too well. I always wonder about these family businesses that people, they live together, they work together. How can they stand each other after a few years?
Well, what's important here in what you're referencing is a difference between like interdependence and codependence. Uh, Frequently, I run into these codependent relationships, and I would say like, oh, upwards of 80-90% of like the couples that are in crisis have some shades of that within the relationship. And in codependence, just so everyone, so we're on the same page, is a situation where it's very difficult to do much of anything without the other person, without checking in on them, seeing what their opinion is. And as opposed to interdependence, where each person is healthy and independent and kind of brings that to, into a relationship. So, as an example, a codependent person might say, okay, I have to, before I make a purchase right here, like a $5, $10, an inconsequential purchase, I have to check in with my spouse to make sure that's okay, because they might be upset if I spend something on myself. That would be a very codependent situation. Or a situation where you say, my spouse is upset, it is my responsibility to make them happy. Whereas, what really should be going on in a interdependent relationship is you say, hey, look, I have some room to make some of my own choices. I enjoy being with this person. I am interested in the other person's emotions, but I'm not, I have some space here where their emotions aren't going to affect me, even if even if I'm concerned for them, even if I'm interested in them. I can look at, or you know, take a look at their emotions and not be super affected, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
It
yeah, it does.
it's an extreme example of the unhealthy version of this is would be a classic borderline personality sort of uh, situation where there's very little boundaries between what's your how you feel and what I feel, and all of that versus I have my own set of feelings, I have my own set of choices, I have my own autonomy, and that's okay, and we bring that together.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about your company, High Thrive Coaching. How are you different than a traditional marriage counselor? What is unique about your company?
Well, in terms of counseling, I typically bill this more as coaching, and there is a little bit of a difference between counseling and coaching because, when I was in school and I would hear from my teachers in terms of counseling, they would tell me, don't tell your clients what to do. That They would say, okay, you talk them through things, help them to come to their own conclusions, help them come to their own ideas. And certainly I incorporate a little bit of that, but that's kind of a counseling approach. And I often hear my clients say, we went to counseling and all we did was talk about our problems and we didn't get anywhere. As opposed to coaching is a lot more action oriented, it's a lot more solution oriented. So there is that side of things. But even beyond that, almost universally, if you go to a typical marriage counselor, one, they might not even be trained in marriage counseling. They might, if you go to a regular therapy office, it's likely not their specialty. But typically what goes on is they require both partners to be there. I mean, it's hard. They might say, well, how do we affect the relationship if we don't have both partners? So this is, like I said earlier, this is where we differ. This is where we've created a bit of a niche. We say, okay, I want to help those people who really want to fix their relationship, but their partner is resistant to coming into counseling. And I want to give them some tips to break the ice, to lower some of the tension, and with, of course, an eventual goal to get their spouse on board. I could even go further. A big thing that we do is we have a lot of online trainings and videos, a lot of self-study things, so that I don't have to go over the same concepts over and over again with each of the clients. I can say, hey, look, this is an important piece. I want you to go and listen to this piece on boundaries. I want you to go do this assignment. And these are all tailored to this specific problem that we help with. I mean, I can go on. We have a lot of, it's basically, we're very, very specialized in relationships, very specialized in situations that are very close to divorce.
Is this all one-on-one, or do you do groups, or how does that work?
We actually have a mix. So I have a team of coaches, and we do have group coaching calls. It's almost, I would almost compare it to like a support group, except it's a little bit more directed because our coaches or myself run the call, and the clients are welcome to come in, ask some questions. I'll spend 10 to 20 minutes with each client who has a question, and then we move on. But then, so there is that option, but I do a fair amount of one-on-one work as well.
Okay. The last question I want to ask, and then we got to kind of wrap it up. I saw on your bio that you said to a spectacular failure, and that brought success later, or something to that effect. It reminded me of Thomas Edison saying that he tried 2,000 times and failed to make a light bulb. And they asked him what he learned, and he says 2,000 ways not to make a light bulb. So is it a parallel with that? I mean, in terms of when you say a spectacular failure in a relationship, are you saying divorced? Like it just didn't work at all?
Oh, me? In
Yeah.
terms of my spectacular failure? No, it didn't get to a point of divorce. So what had happened with me is I had gotten to a point where I had let stress get a hold of me, and I made some poor decisions. This was the time when I was working full time and I had a second job, and I was going to school full time, and my wife and I had just had our third child, and all sorts of other things going on. And anyways, I made some poor choices, which led me to a point where I was basically unemployed with a growing family and feeling like I had very little options left to me. And so I fell into a depression at this point and really wasn't doing much of anything to help myself out. And at some point, my wife, bless her, said, this is enough. We're gonna get out of this. And she really supported me, in getting out of the situation. It was her that really suggested starting a new business. And even though we went tens of thousands of dollars in debt getting this running, was really supportive of it every step of the way. But I don't think that I would be here running a business where we do, multi-million dollars in a given year in services, from nothing. I wouldn't be here as an owner of a company like this if I had not failed. And one of the things that I learned from this is, when you have this sort of situation where it's become very uncomfortable, people are really motivated to change to get out of that. And that's what one of the reasons why I love working with this sort of client base is most of my clients are coming and they're saying, I am at the bottom of the barrel here. I've hit rock bottom and I want something to be different. So it's great because I find a lot of my clients are really willing to make some big changes in their life. And I can empathize a little bit with that because I was at a point where I felt like I hit rock bottom and I needed to make some changes, and it really motivated me.
Well, that's great. We do have to wrap it up. My guest is Marc Johnston. Your company is High Thrive Coaching. Do you have a website you want to give out?
Yeah, it's simply www.hightthrivecoaching.com. We also have a Facebook group that has lots of great information, The Thriving Marriage. You can find us on YouTube as well. We have weekly podcasts there. Yeah.
Do you do virtual or do people have to come in person?
We do virtual almost exclusive. No, actually 100% exclusively. So we have clients, and I meet with people in Canada, Australia, UK, South Africa. I could, all over the world.
Oh, that's great. Okay, Marc, thanks so much for coming.